So what I want to do at the start of our broadcast is take you sector by sector. Remember, when you look at the Indian border, which is about 3,488 kilometers long with the Chinese army, there are three sectors. You've got the northern sector, the Central Army Command, and then the Eastern Army Command. So let's go sector by sector, then we'll go across into China and show you the kind of deployment on the Chinese side of the border, and then we'll tell you why India actually has the edge. So first is the Northern Army Command, which is Uttarakhand and Ladakh, and of course along the Pakistan border, which is the line of control. But right now we're dealing with the line of actual control. We're dealing with part of Himachal Pradesh and with Ladakh. That's the Northern Army Command, which has 34,000 troops. Then there is the Central Army Command, which is largely in the Uttarakhand sector, which is 15,500 troops, and I'm dealing only with the part of the army that is currently taking on China. Let's shift now to the Eastern Army Command, which is the bulk of India's fighting force against China, which is 1,75,000 people. So if I combine the Eastern Army Command, the Central Army Command and the Northern Army Command, we've got 2,25,000 boots on the ground to take on China. Let's now look at what we're up against on the Chinese side. Now, the three sectors again, we'll start with the Tibet Military District, which has 40,000 army personnel across the Tibet Military District on the Chinese side to take on India, which is the longest boundary that they have, which is just opposite India. Then they also rely on troops which are currently in the Xinjiang Military District, which is 70,000, but as you see on the Chinese map, a lot of these troops are much further away from the India border, but this is part of China's fighting formations against the Indian army. Then finally there is the Western Theatre Command, which is between roughly 90,000 to 1,20,000 army personnel. So if you combine the three military commands, the army commands of the Chinese army, that's 2,04,000 to 2,34,000. Let's now compare how this compares between the Indian army that's deployed. So we've got 2,25,000 boots deployed on the ground to take on the Chinese army. China has between 2,04,000 and 2,34,000, but a fair part of this, and we'll build into this once we start our conversation with the military experts, a fair part of the Chinese army is actually quite far away from the India-China border, and therefore they're not able to mobilize quite as quickly because the Indian army that's deployed in the north and the east is deployed directly against the Chinese. So that's a ground forces comparison. Let's now do the same with the Air Force, and I'll start with showing you the Indian air bases, the kind of fighter jets we have, and then compare them with the Chinese. So let's start with the Western Air Command. This is the Western Air Command, which we're dealing with right now. So while a large part of the fighting force of the Western Air Command is actually directed against Pakistan, but a lot of these air bases at places like Srinagar, Pathankot, Adampur, Ambala can be used against China as well. And then of course there is the base at Leh, where we have 75 fighters, 34 ground attack aircraft in the Western Air Command of the Indian Air Force. The Central Air Command, which has air bases in Bareilly, Gwalior and Gorakhpur in eastern Uttar Pradesh, have 94 fighters and 34 ground attack aircraft. After this, let's now come to the Eastern Air Command, and you've got Tezpur, Chabua, Jalpaiguri, and I'm not including over here the AGLs, which are the Advanced Landing Grounds, which is essentially you've got in the forward areas airstrips where we can land military aircraft, but which are not as well equipped as a regular airbase would be. But when you need to push and land military transport aircraft there, you want to send your equipment, they most certainly can be used. The Eastern Air Command is 101 fighters. So if I combine all these three, you've got the Western Air Command with 75 fighters, 34 ground attack aircraft, the Central Air Command 94 fighters, 34 ground attack aircraft, the Eastern Air Command with 101 fighters. So that's the Indian Air Force that's deployed against the Chinese Air Force. Now let's see what we're up against on the other side. So we'll start with the Western Theatre Command of China, which is 157 fighters in the Western Theatre Command. They also have 20 precision strike unmanned aerial vehicles, and then they've got 12 ground attack reconnaissance UAVs in the Western Theatre Command, and 12 precision strike UAVs, and you've got 8 electronic warfare and reconnaissance systems. So if you were to compare, and this is the data that's available for the Chinese Air Force, which is deployed on the other side, 157 fighters, 20 precision strike unmanned aerial vehicles, 12 ground attack reconnaissance UAVs, 12 precision strike UAVs, 8 reconnaissance and electronic warfare systems. Let's compare the Indian Air Force with the Chinese Air Force to give you a sense of how they come across. So on the Chinese side, broadly speaking, you've got 157 fighter craft. On the Indian side, you've got 270, and you've got 68 ground attack aircraft. So what we've been able to demonstrate over the past few minutes, just as we started this conversation, is whether it comes to the Indian military or the Indian Air Force, India actually enjoys an edge in conventional weapons against the Chinese army that is deployed against us.